Hi everyone, this is Jessie Bricker, and I'm going to be presenting on my research proposal. I want to apologize in advance. I have a terrible head cold, so I hope you guys can hear me. And if I have to take a little sip of water here and there, I apologize in advance. So I wanted to talk to you about my proposal, which is on the effects of a comprehensive transition program for young adults on the high-functioning end of the autism spectrum, related to health outcomes and employment outcomes. So first, if we talk about the problem, we know that 25% of individuals on the autism spectrum fall within the average or above average range of intelligence, and yet in our country, almost 90% of those folks are not gainfully employed in competitive employment. They have difficulty maintaining a job for any length of time, and receive inadequate support in terms of supported employment. Research up to this point has really focused on traditional vocational rehabilitation supports, but we know that those are not always effective for individuals on the autism spectrum because they have different needs. One example of this might be that many times it's especially important for individuals who have autism to feel enjoyment and passion about what they're doing, because they are not necessarily motivated by money. So there are always those aspects of a job that we dislike, and it's really important to pay attention to what those are, because those can create an inappropriate match for someone who's on the autism spectrum. We can look at other supports that are necessary in terms of sensory interventions or specific accommodations that make difficulties such as lack of initiation or poor sequencing less of an issue in the workplace. And those are important as well. So the purpose of this study is really to explore what are those specific needs of young adults on the autism spectrum, and not just in terms of accommodations in terms of employment, but also what are the things that make employment outcomes better for them. If we're looking at 90% unemployment rate, what are those contributing factors? How do individuals who have autism behave differently in such a way that employment is difficult? Or what are things that impact their sense of self-efficacy and also psychological well-being? We know that people who are participating in any type of work environment are going to be more successful when they demonstrate flexibility, creativity, problem solving, and those types of issues. In terms of research questions, I have two. The first is, what are the key elements that improve self-efficacy in adolescents and young adults with high-functioning autism? I believe that that's a very important issue that will inform the layout of the comprehensive transition program itself. And is the comprehensive transition program that incorporates those elements effective in improving employment outcomes as well as well-being? So my methods design is actually a mixed methods design, where the first phase, which is qualitative, informs the second phase, which is quantitative in nature. The qualitative portion is a grounded theory approach, in which I'll be looking directly at coming up with some type of development of a theoretical framework that can be utilized to address the specific needs and issues of young adults with autism in terms of their efficacy, well-being, and ability to perform in a job role. Data collection will be done through direct observations and interview of participants, and really I'm interested in looking at the whole lifespan from pre-adolescence through adulthood, because I'm trying to identify markers of specific needs in terms of social motivation, for example. My identification of participants is going to be primarily convenient sampling through networking through local therapy providers, parent support groups, autism associations, and then through the Disability Services Department on our campus at Arkansas State University. Data analysis will consist of coding for themes and trends gathered through the interview and observation process, and identifying what those key elements that we were looking for. In terms of validity, we're really looking at addressing the threats in terms of having a preconceived notion about what those elements should be. So that's my primary concern. I kind of want to just leave it open and see what I find. In order to do that, I'm going to be utilizing a reflexivity in terms of triangulation with a trusted colleague, and then combining our ideas together to come up with those operationalized constructs that we're looking at. And then trying to avoid knowledge of the participants' specific histories in terms of diagnostic information, because I don't want to taint my perception of how I expect them to behave or something like that. And then the second phase of the methods design is quantitative, and it's going to be a quasi-experimental between groups comparison where every other participant that we enroll will be placed in one of two groups. One group will be receiving the comprehensive transition program that we design, and then the other group will not be receiving that service at all. We're going to be doing a pre-post assessment of work history, looking at employment up to that point. We're also going to be looking at well-being scores on both the PROMIS measure and RIF's psychological well-being scale, as in terms of trying to evaluate what their current state of well-being is. And then if we look at after the intervention process, which could take anywhere from 3 to 12 months depending on the specific needs of that client, but we're aiming for right around 6 months, I'm hoping. Then we'll also be redoing those same assessments and looking at retention of employment after 3 months. And that 3-month number is significant because that's the average employment duration for a young adult in America in their first job role, which I thought was really interesting, actually. So participants will be excluded for IQ under 70. That's how we're going to know that they fall into that high functioning category. And then we're going to be looking at two-tailed t-test analysis of those 3 variables, so employment, retention, and well-being. And then we're looking for some of those descriptive variables to further detail what we find. So we might include some demographic information, social history, for example, who does this person live with, or some other details that might help us kind of identify what those variables are. My hypothesis is that what we'll find is that the group participating in the transition program will have significantly better well-being outcomes as well as employment outcomes in terms of being able to attain a position that they are passionate about and retain that employment for at least 3 months. In terms of addressing the validity, internal validity is my biggest issue with this one. I'm going to need to address making sure that our participants are able to go the duration of the program, as well as making sure the program meets their individual needs. So the participants will be excluded if they are not willing to participate in long-term coaching, or if they have mitigating situational factors that may contribute to changes in their perception of well-being and even employment. So if they have a life crisis or a family situation of some kind that might be impacting them, they may be excluded from the study. So those are the biggest issues in terms of that. And then also making sure that we are addressing what we need to in terms of the elements of the design of the program. And that will be primarily done through feasibility studies related to the qualitative information gathered in the first phase. And there also may be a component where we solicit information from other agencies and local providers in terms of what the program needs to entail in order to ensure success, in order to get a more well-rounded approach. In terms of external validity, we really have inherent external validity with this one because we're utilizing a naturalistic environment, and so we should see a nice carryover effect in terms of behavior. Sorry, my voice is giving out a little bit. Ethical considerations. We know there are challenges related to the core deficits of autism that may impact our ability to get good information specifically on self-report measures. And then their ability to express emotion is something that might become a barrier. So I've come up with, I've played around with a little, some ideas to address those. One of the things that I'm toying with is the use of technology to overcome the communication barriers. For example, utilizing texting to do some self-report on different aspects of self-efficacy, flexibility, and problem solving, those kinds of things. I'm even considering looking at the use of emojis or emoticons to help with emotional expression. So let me know if you happen to know anything about that, but I'm kind of just playing around with it at this point. And then the other thing I'm looking at is being able to compare and contrast the self-report measures with the observational evaluations that are done. And then also looking at just personal skill and behavior development. I think it's difficult for most people to take on a long-term behavior change, and that's really what this program is designed to affect. And so, if someone is having difficulty with just kind of working towards that, I think that would be an exclusionary factor for one, but I think it also may involve some flexibility on my part, just in terms of making sure that my timeline doesn't interfere with someone's ability to come to terms with their own behavior change. And so the timeline may be variable between participants, which kind of brings me to my next point, which is that the interventions from individual to individual to individual may look different depending on the needs of that specific person, just by nature of their needs. So the quality of the intervention itself may look a lot different comparing one to another. And my hope is that we can address this through having a general framework for what the intervention entails, and then being able to specifically tailor that intervention to the individual and their specific needs and strengths. So this will be something that I will have to work towards informing my participants of at the time of their consent as well. And then these are just some references for you that I've pulled together from just the things that I mentioned today in my presentation. But I hope you enjoyed it, and I appreciate your feedback. Thank you.